Of the Ol'Timers comic book show, the show where the hosts aren't old, but the comics most certainly are. Joining me this week, as ever, it's the Professor.
Hey, Johnny, how you doing?
Hey, welcome back from COVID Central. I mean, Terrificon.
Well, I did get the gift of COVID at Terrificon this year. Not that it was a terrible show, but
Well, there
hey,
you
that's
go.
what you get when you follow up a show right after San Diego Comic Con, right? So,
Indeed, indeed. And join us for the second week in a row is the third Crusader.
right!
Gentlemen,
Buenos dias, senor.
buenos dias.
And we have full house. We have a full
Yay!
house again. Ah,
You
basking.
miss it. You miss that third opinion.
We do, we do. Even if the bad jokes also come with that opinion.
Everyone's got a cost to pay, right?
Indeed, indeed. And
Yes.
unfortunately, your humour is our cross. All right. We're here today to talk about topic. Professor, this was your topic. You suggested this one. So we're here to talk about this bad boy.
Yeah, the Comics Code, baby. We haven't talked about this. This show's been going on for like 3 years, and we never touched it. So I kind of wanted to take a look and see the history and the reasoning behind why the comic book industry decided to self-censor for
Mm,
decades, maybe a couple of decades too long than they did, right?
maybe.
So I think it's a fascinating subject to talk about, and I think it definitely affected the comics that we read still today. So
Yeah.
I,
I
I
mean,
think
I'll tell you a little secret about the comic code. Every time I used to buy comics in the 70s, I thought it was a sticker that was on the comic. Tried peeling it off for ages. Couldn't get it off.
it's like a stamp. Yeah.
I'm a moron. What do I know? There you go. Right. So, 13th, do you feel that the comic code was a prevalent part of the whole comic book industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where comics wouldn't be the same without it, but they certainly would have been different with it.
Hmm.
Uh, so, yeah, it's just one of those things that's just happened. I mean,
Okay.
just imagine if there was never a comics code. That's all I think about. Like,
Well, that's what we're
Yeah.
what
learning
kind of
now.
comics would we have gotten?
I
Yeah,
think
true.
I think the industry probably would have fizzled out.
Do you think?
I do. I really, really do. Without the
No.
comics code, I think the industry would have fizzled.
I kind of agree with Bud only in the sense of it's different times back then,
Yeah.
right? So you had people that really weren't exposed to
Yep.
this type of literature, and then mix it in with a heavy dose of maturity for what's intended to be for kids.
Yep.
I think it could have gotten into a bad place fast.
With no comics code, the comics would have been taken away from the kids, especially back in that's 1954. We're talking about there
Hmm.
would have been there would have been no Marvel uh, in the early 60s because I just think that the people would have dispersed and done something else. So
All right.
I think comics would have missed the boat.
All right. So, what was as I understand it, the advent of the comic code was due to many factors, one of which being this bad
That's,
boy of a book.
that's the
Uh,
factor.
yeah, so this is Seduction of the Innocent. This is by Frederick Wortham. And the story is, as I understand, and you guys can chip in on this as always, is that he wrote that comic books were the main reason for juvenile delinquency in the United States, and then went on to postulate theories such as Wonder Woman being a lesbian because of her abnormal strength, that Batman and Robin were living in a homosexual relationship because they're the only males in the house. Obviously, don't look at Bert and Ernie on Sesame Street. Just saying. Um, they shared a bedroom for Christ's sakes. And this and this led. I'm not saying Bert and Ernie again. If they were, it's not a problem. It's just it's a bad joke. I apologize.
Nothing wrong with it.
And this led to the Comics Code, which also had an impact down the line for other publishers. Have I missed any key points?
Not really. I
Professor?
mean, you're hitting all the notes. So You know, the Seduction of the Innocent, when this came out, really kind of took the country by storm, because you know, the comic books, when you think of comic books like in the heyday of the golden age of comic books, it was really kind of like World War II, when you
Yeah.
all I think of is like the soldiers overseas, and they all had comics in their back pocket to kill time, you know, whether it was Superman or you know. And then when the war was over, the war comics were huge, and superheroes weren't as big in the 40s and 50s as they used to be. But the whole Seduction of the Innocent was done where Frederick Wortham really attacked primarily, well, EC Comics. You can really kind of take a look and say, yeah, they were kind of really pushing the envelope as far as what was considered good taste back then, right? I mean, the stories, the crime stories, the horror stories, anything that you could think of, perfect, right? So you think of all those stories that were really kind of pushing the envelope, as far as if you were an 8-year-old kid walking into you know, the newsstand to with your mom or something. Your mom's looking at this, and it's like, you're not buying that, and of course that made you want it to get more, right? So
Hell yeah.
I think one of the things that bears mentioning is back in those days, consuming books and magazines was really one of the main forms of media.
right.
Yeah.
This
Not
no
everybody had a TV.
right. Not everyone had a TV, or you had to find someone that did, but books were more accessible, newspapers, magazines, whatever. And these type of stories, it was just full literature with depictions. So that would be the attractive part of it,
Yeah.
especially to kids, because it made it easier for them to comprehend. And I think that's what kind of started this ball rolling off to get the code going.
That's an interesting point, actually. We forget that back in the day there was no mass media TV. There was no Disney Plus. There was no Netflix. There was none of that going on. But still, you kind of think, you know. I mean, I would have thought I would have thought delinquency would be on the down low, because kids are spending the time reading comic books.
Well, and for the
What,
most
what am I
part,
missing?
I think you're right. And Wortham was actually later on, decades later, of course, raked over the coals for the way he did his research for writing Seduction of the Innocent, where it did kind of come out that let's say he didn't do as much either vetting or of his own research. He was getting a lot of stories from like just a few different people. His control groups that he was looking at for juvenile delinquency were already juvenile delinquents with behavior issues,
Yeah.
not focused on you know, on comic book reading, right? So these were kids that were already in trouble. He wasn't looking at you know, study groups with you know, with
A
regular
control
well-adjusted children.
Yeah, exactly.
So
It's not like a control panel. You
yeah,
you 10, 13-year-olds read comic book. You 10 don't read comic books. I guarantee the
yeah.
10 not reading comics will be up to no good, because they've got nothing to do.
Yeah, it's you know, you can even take this argument into the, you know, the 90s, where it came out with everybody was blaming video games for violence in schools, right? I mean, it's the same thing where everybody has to blame somebody else for something. And does reading comics, does seeing these images really kind of so traumatically you know, traumatize you that you're going to go out and commit these acts of violence because of what you read in a comic book?
Well,
And
sorry, carry on.
no, I think it's silliness to the nth degree, but as a parent, I understand. Like, I don't know if I would necessarily want my 8-year-old looking at that middle cover of Vault of Horror, with, you know, not to mention that they could probably see whatever they want online now anyway. So, but back
So,
then, I totally get it.
well, I hear what you're saying. And I live near a town called Middlesbrough. And in the 80s, a gunman, we don't have a lot of gun crime in the northeast, stormed a school and shot loads of kids. And when he got arrested, the Sunday newspapers, the tabloids, read an article that he was violent and he was into gun crime because he read violent Hulk comics. And I remember thinking to myself, that's absolute BS, because I mean, the Hulk is not going to inspire anyone to pick up a gun, because the Hulk doesn't need a gun, to be honest. It's a Hulk, right?
Yeah.
But you're right, there is this fear, I suppose, where video games, visual nasties, the Batman movie, the Denver shooting, and when Dark Knight came out.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Dark Knight Rises came out. So I don't know. I've read some of these EC comics when I was in the 80s. My granddad had a couple of these, and I thought they were fine. I laughed them off, But by the same token, I don't know. I'll tell you all about a story. A Batman cover used to scare the crap out of me, but So
I read Superman stories as a kid, but so did my cousin. One of us jumped out of a second-story window with a cape on, and I can tell you it wasn't me.
Fair enough. Is he all right, or did he perish?
Oh, he's more than all right. He broke his arm, but he laughed about it later.
Okay, cool, excellent. So yeah, you're right. I think there has to be an element of culpability to these things.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't watch when I watch Night Ride. I don't jump in my car and decide I can turbo boost across bridges and stuff. I just drive and do my way to work.
Well, the big thing we talk about in comics really is like the Human Torch. You read a comic book about the Human Torch, you're not necessarily going to go out and dump gasoline over yourself and light a match. Right?
Well, I would, because my name's Johnny, so obviously that matters.
That's a hot take.
Flame on! No, it didn't work. Damn it.
I think it's a double-edged sword at the end of the day. You have multiple factors affecting people psychologically, whether you're a child or an adult. Upbringing is part of it. Yeah, media to a degree.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, the people writing this stuff, they may be okay, but this is their art form. This is the way that they express themselves, and other people find that entertaining. And I think that's the line where some people struggle with distinguishing the difference between entertainment and reality. So with the Comics Code, as we all know, especially like in the 70s, with all these campy stories and things like that, the Comics Code did hamper some very talented writers from only going so far from really giving you the story that they intended to give you. So you had to use the imagination for yourself to make it creepier, scarier, or whatever feeling that they were going for. So it's a double-edged sword at the end of the day is how I look at it.
Yeah.
I think before we go any further, we do need to admit or advise, I suppose, that since its inception in the 50s, the Comic Code did change all the way through the various decades, or else we'd end up with Batman in space every time. It wasn't the creators, as you said, that managed to work around that. You look at Daniel O'Neill and Neil Adams on Batman, for example. Some of the stuff in Spider-Man, some of which was code approved, some of it wasn't, which we're going to have a look at some of the stuff. So creators managed to work around the code and then build into the code with the idea of, hey, we got away with it once, so therefore we should be able to get away with it again, type of. And then the code had to change because, I think as we ourselves can recognize, there's not many kids buying comic books nowadays.
No, there's not.
So now you've really got to think to yourself, who's the Comic Code really protecting? Or it's not protecting me anymore.
I actually have the actual 1954, the list of the Comics Code, the stuff that you couldn't put in a comic.
Cool, go for it. Let's hear what we couldn't have.
All right, so in 1954, now this is the publishing industry actually regulating themselves, right? So this is not there was no witch hunts in the 50s court. I mean, there was, but I mean, this is
I was going to say, I think it did not go to Senate.
There was. They did end up in court federally, but the Comics Code was established by the publishers voluntarily. These are the list. This is the list of things in 54 that the code initially prevented you from seeing.
Good.
Crimes shall never be presented in such a way as to create sympathy for the criminal, to promote distrust of the forces of law and justice, or to inspire others with a desire to imitate criminals. If crime is depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority. Criminals shall not be presented so as to be rendered glamorous or to occupy a position which creates a desire for emulation. In every instance, good shall triumph over evil, and the criminal punished for his misdeeds. Scenes of excessive violence shall be prohibited. Scenes of brutal torture, excessive and unnecessary knife and gunplay, physical agony, the gory and gruesome crime shall be eliminated. No comic magazine shall use the words horror or terror in its title. Goodbye, EC Comics. All scenes of horror, excessive bloodshed, gory or gruesome crimes, depravity, lust, sadism, masochism shall not be permitted. All lurid, unsavory, gruesome illustrations shall be eliminated. Inclusion of stories dealing with evil shall be used or shall be published only where the intent is to illustrate a moral issue, and in no case shall evil be presented alluringly, nor so as to injure the sensibilities of the reader. Scenes dealing with or instruments associated with Walking Dead, torture, vampires and vampirism, ghouls, cannibalism, and werewolfism are prohibited.
Scooby-Doo wouldn't exist. God damn it, Scooby-Doo.
Profanity, obscenity, smut, vulgarity, or words or symbols which have acquired undesirable meanings are forbidden. Nudity in any form is prohibited, as is indecent or undue exposure. Suggestive and salacious illustration or suggestive posture is unacceptable. I think they banned fishnets. Females.
What? Fishnets? What?
Females shall be drawn realistically without exaggeration of any physical qualities. Illicit sex relations are neither to be hinted at nor portrayed. Rape scenes as well as sexual abnormalities are unacceptable. Seduction and rape shall never be shown or suggested. Sex perversion of or any inference to same is strictly forbidden. And the final one is nudity with meretricious purpose and salacious postures shall not be permitted in the advertising of any product. Clothed figures shall never be presented in such a way as to be offensive or contrary to good taste or morals. Yeah, that was a bit long, but hey, that's all. That's the list.
Who set the guidelines for things like what was deemed as smut, what was deemed as depravity, what was deemed as
the taste police from 1954. But you can imagine that basically that's okay. Anything and everything we deem to be not meeting the code, because it was kind of a bit nebulous there, right? So what is smut? What is
Look at it from this perspective, right? Not only was this a challenge for any publisher and then other publishers that were trying to get their name out there.
Yeah.
Imagine how to qualify for the job of being an editor. So not only are you trying to get a story out there, now you got to deal with this.
Yep. So, and then, that this is why, and all of a sudden in 1954, Superman started fighting aliens in every issue. So did Batman, right? Gone was the Joker, the Penguin for years, right? You didn't see those villains because they weren't allowed to do villainous things, or if they were, and there's no such thing as multi-issue storylines, right? Because by the end of this issue, everything has to be wrapped up and the villain has to pay the price. Right.
Oh my God. Yep. Right. So obviously things changed because we all know comics came back in the 70s massively. Dark Knight Detective came out, as I said already, alluded to Spider-Man.
1971 was when they had a huge overhaul in the code, and that's when you started seeing characters like Morbius, Werewolf by Night.
Morbius is a cheat though. He's the living vampire. He doesn't need blood, does he? So
that's true. And then when Marvel started doing zombies and voodoo, they couldn't call them zombies, right? Remember they called them Zuvembis? You remember?
God. Oh my God. I don't remember that, but I'll take
Morbius
your word.
sucked.
When they brought Wonder Man back in the pages of Avengers, he was a Zuvembi.
Yeah. I knew that. I knew it had something to do with Wonder Man. You and Wonder Man.
Hey, it's the Avengers in me.
Yeah. Before we take a break, let's take a look at our first book. It's so we're looking at 3 books, kinda. We're going to look at 2 books that are code related to the code. Then we'll look at a series of books that kind of fly in the face that a little bit. So we're going to start off with this bad boy. This is House of Secrets, number 83. Dun, dun, dun. I had to do some digging for this one. Let's see. So Marv Wolfman, Jerry Conway are on writing duties. Alex Toth is on art, from what I've got.
It's a classic.
That's all I've got on this one, I'm afraid. January 1970, so just before the overhaul of the code. I couldn't find this on eBay anywhere in the UK. Go collect, have this anywhere from $40 to $125. There we go. Who picked this?
Me.
It's funny because we talked about Comic Code, and this has got a Comic Code badge on it. There it is, right there at the top.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So, what was it about this book 13th that made you like to talk about it?
I think the creators involved and the story surrounding the book, which was one of the. So, House of Secrets is an anthology book. So you get 3 stories in here. But one of the writers with this issue is Marv Wolfman, who we know very well. Obviously, maybe more for the new Teen Titans in the 80s. But here in this point in time, he got this writing assignment. And in the book, in one of the stories, it mentions 2 words, Wandering Wolfman.
There it is on that page there. See if I can zoom this in. This never works when I do it very well. There you go.
Yep. And as Bud said before, with the list of the stuff that the Comics Code Authority did not like, they took this and said, we're not approving this because you can't show werewolves and Wolfman or whatever it is that they got offended with. With that being said, that you can't show any monsters or whatever. Another writer who we know very well has a story in here, Jerry Conway. Okay. He went to the Comics Code Authority and said, you guys are idiots. The guy who wrote the story is Marv Wolfman. That's actually his last name. He wasn't talking about a werewolf. So then they're like, okay, fine. You can go ahead with the story. But when you put that Comics Code Authority on there, you got to make sure that inside of the book that you clearly credit who wrote the book so that we know that it's not an actual Wolfman, but the guy's actual name. The story continues because of this. It led to other writers starting to get credited because they were complaining like, hey, why did Marv Wolfman get that privilege? So what about us? So thus was born the crediting that we're all familiar with, making it part of the everyday thing with comics.
The crediting for DC, Marvel had been doing it for years.
Correct.
Well,
and that was one thing. Yeah, one thing that always turned me off with DC prior to this was we all know the creators, we all know the writers, but not everybody knows that. Like us, we know that, but not everybody else knows that. If they don't have that distinction of saying that, yeah, I read this story, this had that feel of this writer or the art, like Alex Toth, right?
Yeah.
Love him for Space Ghost. I know him for Space Ghost.
Yeah.
This was, in this issue, Alex Toth. But for someone who's not familiar with his artwork, you wouldn't know who it is. For us,
and you weren't supposed to. DC didn't want you to know who they were.
Correct. Correct. But that's the significance of this issue, where you started to get credits, which are very important.
I must have missed the credit. I must have missed the credits page because I've been through this book a couple of times. I can't see.
It's on. So right when you said Wandering Wolfman, the next page says written by Marv Wolfman. It doesn't tell you who did the art, though, I don't think.
Yeah, above Alex Toth.
Does it?
Yeah, in the first story.
Sorry, let me just get back.
See,
next page.
Right,
there it is. Yeah. Oh man, they did that well, didn't he? Didn't even spot that.
Yeah,
crazy.
It's not. I wouldn't say it's prevalent, but
I didn't
Yeah.
know if it was big. I didn't know if it was because of the sex element in there. Because she's quite a sexy young lady there, looking quite buxom as that is a very unnatural
Is it?
form,
Yeah.
buxom girl.
See, that's
And
where
then
I think it's funny. I think it's funny because it's kind of subjective what
yeah,
gets. It depends. I guess it depends on who's reviewing your book, what kind of censorship they want to apply to it.
Also remember the times, like even the writing in
Yeah.
here, like the style of lettering,
mm,
is psychedelic and whatnot, and this is synonymous with the times that were going on back then in the late 60s, early 70s.
mm,
Mhm.
So may not have been this book, but there were other forms of media back then pushing the envelope. So
right.
it's like one of those things, like what do? We got a book to publish. That's harder. TV was around, radio was around. If you want this book to sell, you got to give a little bit. You know what I
Mm,
mean? After all, this was a business, right?
Mhm.
yeah.
So, but at the end of the day, the stories in here, for those that are interested, it's anthology series. There's 3 tales. This book wasn't meant to blow your socks off, but
Phew,
it's just basically
well done. I think you've
trying
achieved that.
to, yeah, it's just like a something to think about, from different perspectives. That's what it offered you. Chilling tale, nothing to go home and you're gonna lose sleep about it because you're
Yeah.
traumatized. But again, like I said earlier, writers, artists, editors, the publishers, they had to find a way around the comics code.
Yeah.
Mm,
And whether you love it or hate it, like if you would have taken that away, what kind of story would we have gotten? It would
Yeah.
probably be totally different.
Yeah.
So I credit these guys during this era. So some people may say, oh, DC back then, who cares? You know what? Why don't you look at it from the perspective of the creators and the challenges that they had to do to present you a good story despite being handcuffed?
and it's a horror. It's a horror
And then
thing
it's
as
a
well.
horror theme thing. Exactly.
So I mean, they're talking about making it look for yourself.
Yeah, and look,
It's try.
we all know Marv Wolfman's career, right?
Yeah.
So this is a perfect assignment. Like if Marv Wolfman, let's just say was a rookie, all right,
Mm,
if you're good, you should be able to handle this. And if you pass this test, you're good for anything else. Because some of these titles, as we go on through time, let's face it, the interest, wanes.
mm,
But looking back, you got to have all that thing. Look at this from every perspective. The time, what the creators were dealing with, and to Bud's point, the comics code, which in some cases was implemented and enforced, and in others it wasn't.
Well, I have a better analogy for this. So try to think about writing or filming Friday the 13th part whatever, and
13.
then they come back and they tell you we love it, but it's going to be rated G.
Yeah. Yeah. That would do it.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're looking at it going, oh my God, how do I change this story to make it
Yeah.
right for all audiences?
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's tough.
And the one thing that we all know in comics, you're never gonna please everyone.
True.
You're never gonna do that.
True. So true. Right. Good choice. Story wise, I was reading it. I was kind of thinking, what? It reminds me a lot of that. You mentioned the psychedelic stuff. It reminded me a lot of some of the British stuff Eagle used to do in the 80s. Kind
Tales
of
from the Crypt.
Yeah, kind of trippy kind of vibe. Didn't recognize Alex Toth's art at all in any shape, way, or form. So I was surprised when I saw that. Nice though. I thought it was, it had that level of realism that we've come to expect from some of the DC books at the time. But no, good call. And you're right, absolutely. Credits. We love credits now. Where would we be without them?
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. Good choice. Right. Before we get into the next one, or three, time for an advert. This is approved by the Comics Code. It is the Crisis in the Toyverse. smut in there. I didn't see any fishnets. I didn't see anything untoward. Bobo's cooking might be scary, but
This is definitely rated G for great.
Check it out, Crest in the Toyverse, all your figure news as and when. Excellent. All right, next up then is, I think this is a consensus choice. If you're talking comics code, I think we have to talk these books, right?
Yes.
Yeah, this is the infamous Amazing Spider-Man. We're starting off with number 96. Right, so we're going to briefly talk about 96 through 98. So it's 3 issues from 1971. I'll give you the lowdown. 96 on eBay is around £70. On Go Collect, you've got a grade 8 at 200, 9.6 is $1,650. 97 is 85 on eBay. Grade 8 again, $200, 9.6, $925, so 925. And then it's ASM 98, £60 eBay. Go Collect grade 8 is 160, 9.6 is 650. Now, remember, if you are using eBay or any other auction site that you are buying comics on, remember, these are just guide prices that we provide, and don't sue us or anything like that. Go Collect are the real professionals on this, so that's what you should be paying on average. The auction sites, don't forget to check out all the photos for all the gradients and all the different bits and bobs of a comic book. If you have any questions, just ask the guy. Ask the person selling the book, right? And if you think the deal's too good to be true, then you know what? It's too good to be true. That's it. Enough said. So, written by Stan Lee, art by Gil Kane with John Romita, who we talked about a lot recently. Letters by Artie Simic. Professor, you are our regular Marvel guru. What is the deal with Amazing Spider-Man 96?
Well, the interesting story about this is that this is a story, if you believe Stan Lee, was that the government actually came to him and said, "We want you to do a story about drug use because it's prevalent. It's becoming more prevalent in our society. We want to do something that's more of like a cautionary tale for the kids that are reading your comic books to not get into drugs." And and Stan Lee would, he wants to do it, and he says, "Hey, but there's a comics code here that that says we can't depict drug use of any kind." And so what they did at the time was they just made the decision to publish the book without the code. So yeah, I mean, in this, of course, obviously we know the story is that Harry Osborn, Peter's best friend, has been a little bit of a junkie, right?
Pill popper.
Comes out that he's into the drugs. And I mean, today this storyline would probably go on for 25 issues.
With one panel per issue with the cap of a drug bottle somewhere. And then
G for Goblin.
So this storyline for you kind of got the hint even before this issue. They did, something's up with Harry. We don't know what's up with Harry, and then here in issue 96, you find out that he's been taking drugs, and of course by 98 he's all set, right? Problem solved. But this is typical. Your typical late the early 70s Spider-Man. This is the end of Lee's run, by the way, right? So is this his last story?
I'm not sure. It may well
Jerry
be.
Conway comes in pretty quickly after issue 100, right? So I think maybe he writes the first 100 issues and then he's done, or maybe 102. But anyway, this is the tail end of Stan Lee's run on Spider-Man. So for all of us that love Lee and Ditko, Lee and Romita, Stan Lee is still my favorite Spider-Man writer. And this really is typical, You know, if you're reading this book, this is your typical late '60s, early '70s Spider-Man with a great supporting cast. You know, with you know, Peter's life is always in turmoil and chaos, and you know, well, you got Mary Jane and Harry and Norman,
Why
and
is MJ hitting on Peter so much?
well,
Was there ever explained, or the fact that
Because Gwen was gone.
well, she's not
yeah,
quite. She's not
Gwen
quite.
went off to
London.
France or London or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Mary Jane was there for a bit, but
Wow.
Everything comes back to Gwen Machine. You should know.
I should know that, shouldn't
Yeah.
I?
yeah. So I mean, this is a great storyline. It's very topical, and you know what? You wouldn't have necessarily really known that this didn't have the comics code on it if anybody
No.
didn't tell you. You know, it is the well, the drug use now. I mean, of course, if you're reading back issues, this is not anything new. You
Mm.
know, but this was for the time in 1971. People were probably like, "Oh my God, there's drugs."
Yeah. It wasn't the drug issue. Drug use wasn't the thing that got me. It's this page here, where and the following one. It's like the actually, you know, the whole debate and argument they have about it, and who's responsible and who's this, and just the iconography of the characters in there. Kind of like there's a lot to going on there for a
Yeah,
1970s book,
yeah,
and I think fair enough. If you believe the story, that the government said, right, the drug issue. Stan Lee put some extra stuff in this. It wasn't just, oh, let's throw some drugs in. They actually handled it really, really well for the time.
yeah. He turned it into a race issue, or
Yeah.
you know what everybody's different perceptions were at the time. So, um,
And that,
yeah,
and even now, I mean, race is, you know, drugs are still classed as a race issue for a load of people. So it's interesting how that hasn't changed in the last, what's that, 50 years, 53 years? Scary.
yeah, it's
I feel old now. Cool.
Then you are the right show, Johnny.
Yay! Woo! Yeah, Harry and not well Norman getting his memory back. He's having to think about it. Oh no, what's going on?
yeah.
Um,
You still
and
have to
then,
have a Spider-Man book around
yeah,
all the political issues, right? So,
yeah, hell yeah. 13. What did you think? I mean, it's good to see your Gwen. You getting a bit of a name check there,
Of
surely.
course, of course. There's a lot of things going on. Issue 95, the issue previous to this, was something I read a lot as a kid, thanks to Marvel Tales, because I couldn't afford to get the actual 95. So I was very familiar with the whole Gwen going to London thing because she really wanted Peter to propose to her, and that was something that I guess he wasn't ready for,
Mm,
and then kind of regrets later on. But
mm,
so not only is he carrying that over into issue 96, I think the masterful job with Lee that he did was, how do we squeeze in a tale of drugs and whatnot while not disrupting Spider-Man continuity? So if you
that's a
think
good
of all the
call.
moving pieces with the Green Goblin, who was around since issue 14, his best friend, all of that, you got the drugs, you got Mary Jane, who, and I'm always going to say this, to me, my favorite Spider-Man issues are at least the first 150 at least. So this
Mm,
is well within that. And Mary Jane was a different person than what we know today, and the relationship she had with everyone else. So she may have been attracted to Peter, but Gwen was always there. So
was
mm,
she with Harry at this point?
yeah.
um, yeah, she is, but then she also declares her independence, like saying that you never can have me. Like,
Mm,
you're lucky that I'm near you, kind of.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So there's that going on. But to your guys' point with the politics, the arguments and things like that, this was something that people were tackling with then, more arguments than solutions, in my
mm,
opinion. However, we want to put this in one of our premier Marvel books because Spider-Man was getting a lot of attention,
mm-hmm,
and this is how they did it. But I think it was a masterful job because if it was going to happen to somebody, who would it have been? And I think in picking Harry Osborn, I think he was the perfect choice because of all of the inner turmoil he already had, just being the son of Norman Osborn, and then being Peter's roommate. It was like, okay, perfect. That's our angle. Let's bring the Goblin back in.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it worked beautifully. To publish without the Comics Code Authority, you know, kudos to Marvel for that.
Mm.
I think it's important, and I think it's one of these things that happened that kind of helped people realize, like, listen, man, this code is a little outdated.
Agreed.
You know what I mean?
Agreed.
So,
I'd say a couple of interesting points just to think about this. When we talk about not Harry as a character, he is the overlooked character from everybody. MJ overlooks him for Peter. His dad overlooks him for Peter. That's going to raise some animosity in the character even before we start talking about the pills, right?
Yep.
So that's the sort of drive that he has. I think that kind of that shows up in the next issue where he tells Peter that he's had enough. He wants him to leave. Whilst we were just flicking through this book, I've just done a quick search because Harry's issue with pills, it doesn't go away in these last 3 issues, which is again another kind of element of realism that you might not expect from a Spider-Man book, because it reappears towards the 120s. Funny enough, the 121 where he's having an attack and he thinks he's hallucinating Peter coming back to see him. Both 120, 121, and 122 both approved by the Comics Code.
Well, they had. I think this was probably right on the cusp there of when they reworked the code. So they started kind of letting some things in that they had never previously done.
Yeah.
one thing too, in true Stan Lee fashion, it was always about the dramatics, right?
Yeah.
The cover says it all. Peter gets a job. Oh, wow, what job? I thought he was a photographer. You read about it in here. Mary Jane gets a spotlight. Green Goblin is coming back. He was already pictured as or depicted as Spider-Man's deadliest enemy, or one of them. And, you know, dramatic return of what happened? I thought he had amnesia. Well, not anymore.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of drama going on in just this one single issue, never mind the story arc.
Yeah. Absolutely great. We've talked on your sabbatical 13th, we did a Ramita special, and we talked about how great this era of Spider-Man was. The Stan Lee Ramita, Stan Lee Ditko, that whole kind of vibe screams Spider-Man. If I'm picking up a Spider-Man book, it's because of that stuff. Damn sure isn't about the recent stuff. Maybe you should put the code back in for that. A little bit harsh, maybe. I don't know.
No, not at all.
No,
There's
not
no
at all.
comics code here.
No comics code here. There should be on the recent stuff, just saying. All right. The last book is a little bit out of left field for us because we don't normally talk about this type of character or this type of book, to be fair. And we should, because it has massive appeal. This is Saga of the Swamp Thing, Volume 2, number 29 from 1984. You can get this as little for $5 on eBay. Check those grades, people. Go collect, have it as $70. And that's for mid-grade range book. Written by Alan Moore. Stephen Bissett is on art. John Totleben is on inks. Tiziana Woods on color, and John Costanza, DC's letterer of the time, par excellence, is on letters. This is Swamp Thing. Notice there is no code on this. At this point, I'm going to talk about a credit I don't normally give. The editor of this book is Karen Berger. She went on to create Vertigo for DC Comics. So when we talk about Vertigo, we're talking about things like Swamp Thing, Animal Man, Sandman,
Doom Patrol,
Hellraiser,
the Sandman Mystery Theater with the original Wesley Dodd Sandman character. Do DC miss Vertigo now? Yes, they do. Absolutely, they do. And you can still feel Karen's influences on comic books through the Dark Horse Improv Burger books. There you go. Plug out of the way. What was it? Who picked this?
That was my pick. This is my
Hey,
pick. Yeah.
Professor.
Well done,
Yeah.
Professor.
It's a great book. I haven't read this in ages, and when I started flicking through it, I was like, "Is this the one where?" Oh yes, it is. Why? Why does this need no code, practically?
That's what I was wondering about. That's why I picked this book, because doing my research, I was like, we get into the 80s, and the
Mhm.
code's still going strong in the 80s, right?
Mhm.
And when a book comes back that doesn't get approved by the code, it was kind of big news, right? It was like,
Right.
well, they had to change, they had to make changes. I got quite a bit of it. I think one of the reasons Alan Moore left Swamp Thing was because of arguments over what he could include in the book, right? This one actually, DC decides to publish it without the code because
Mm.
they had believed in the story that much. So I had to for this, I read this for the pod for the first time.
All
I'd
right.
never previously read. I don't know how much Swamp Thing I've ever read, really,
Mm.
but this book, and I had to tell you, when I read it, it seems a little bit tame for what comes shortly after, right? Once once we once we see this is 1984. Within a
Yep.
couple of years, we're getting Watchmen released
Yep.
without a code by Alan
Killing,
Moore as well.
killing joke.
Yep, yeah.
Mhm.
So the floodgates start to open, and I think that this might have been the gateway book
Mm.
for a lot of the for a lot of the creators, for a lot of the editors to be a little brave about
Mm-hmm.
not having the code on the book. I think they start realizing that the code has maybe outlived its usefulness, and it's maybe not really affecting sales so much if we publish it without it. So,
Mm.
reading this book, I mean, I thought it was great. This was like a mind f the entire book. I mean, read the
Well,
book.
that's something all over.
Yeah,
F for fantasy, right, bud?
yeah. So this is this is Abby Arcane, right? And there's a whole story realizing that she's like a zombie, right? Is that
No,
what I got out of it?
no, not yet.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
she is. There are zombies around her,
yeah,
and
yeah, but I thought, but
trying to
she's, yeah, yeah, go ahead.
trying to turn her into a zombie through copious amounts of sex with her uncle.
Right.
And I'm like, what? So I did a little bit of research for this book, and when you search Google, why was this book not code approved? And it's the DC had an issue with the zombies. I'm thinking, wait a second, it's the zombies that had a problem with, not the smoking herbs to get into a sort of like trance state, not the alleged rape of Abby, not the fact she's sleeping with her uncle. It's the zombies you've got a problem with. All right,
So,
okay, that makes perfect sense.
okay, so maybe I read the book too fast, but I just didn't get so this is her uncle.
Turns out to be her uncle.
I thought she was married to him.
Oh,
No?
it's just been that. It's been her uncle for the last 6 months or so.
Oh.
It's
Okay.
arcane.
So
It's
because I'm
arcane,
reading
so.
I'm reading it in a vacuum,
Yeah,
and I just
exactly.
assumed
Yeah.
I assumed that this was like her husband, and that he was manipulating her this way,
And
like
that's it.
to
That's
get
why
into
the
like
double.
a group orgy with a bunch of zombies.
And this is where the line in there is just say uncle.
I didn't pick that up. I
Yeah.
didn't pick that up. But
So there is a lot of things going on in this book. I mean, Swamp Thing is notorious for, I think that Abby and Alec don't have sex. He ends up taking she eats a pod off his body, and that gives her like an orgasmic trip down the line. That's how they consummate their relationship. She's already been used for a vessel of horror standards already, and now she's getting intimate with her uncle without her knowledge. So that classed as rape. And then of course the zombies as well. It's like there is it's like Alan Moore, and I don't know the guy. And if I'm speaking out of turn, Mr. Miller, I genuinely apologize. But it's like he looked at the code and said, right, let's see what I can put in this book. And boom, just throwing everything at it.
That's so when I do think of creators that push the issue or push the envelope when it came to the code, Alan Moore is the first person I think of, because I think that you look at I think he looked at the code, or maybe he didn't even look at the code, right? But maybe he looked at it as a suggestion instead of a rule, right? And so
maybe.
let's see what I can get away with it. And that's, I mean, he did come out with Watchmen right after that. They didn't put a code on, and then he goes off after that and does his own thing. So
it's amazing. Yeah, he obviously had fallout with DC down the line somewhere along.
Well, I think from what I remember, he left Swamp Thing because of a portrayal of Jesus Christ in his book in Swamp Thing, right? Which
I don't know why he
the
left.
code. Yeah,
I mean, there's not even a for mature readers sticker on this. Vertigo books carry for mature readers, so this is kind of, as you say, the prelude to all of that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of elements going on. 13th. What do you think of this book?
It's crazy because love him or hate him, Alan Moore is probably one of the most talented writers in ever. Love him or hate him. And a tale like this, just try to picture yourself. Can you write a Swamp Thing story? And I guarantee you that once you try to answer that question, a lot of other people probably can't do it. But here he is where he can. He gave you a story. The art matches what he put out there. Every Alan Moore story that I've read makes you think. It's going to make you go back and read it again. I guarantee you that once we're done with today's show, Bud's going to read this again. I'm confident in that, because
he's right.
You feel like, okay, that was a crazy story. Wow. But what did I miss? I got to go back and make sure I didn't miss anything.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to Alan Moore's writing talent. The art matches here.
It's layered.
It's something completely out of left field. As far as for it not having a code, just think about the time in the mid 80s, right? Media, movies, big ticket movies, R-rated movies. Kids able to go to a video rental place and rent an R-rated movie because they knew your parents. So that censorship thing was starting to wane a little bit, because they're like, oh, what the hell are we going to do? These kids are going to access it anyways.
Yeah.
So now you're talking about a comic book. How is a book going to compete with that? Video games also are on the rise. So here you have a writer in Alan Moore, where if someone did put a gun to his head and said, look, this story is it's fire, I love it, but I can't put this out there. How do you think that what would I have done to Alan Moore's career? So here we are. This is it. The gloves are off. And to Johnny's point, this is the advent of some great things to come down the line for mature readers. So it's just one of those things of how do you look at it? Like, oh my God, am I offended? Or, oh my God, like this is the start of something else for comics to actually have another market to appeal to the mature reader. Because face it, what kid is going to read Swamp Thing?
I think that is the key point. That is the key point of why the code, in my opinion, hurt comic books down the line in 1950s, because it turned all the different things you could read into the same thing. And it wasn't until the advent of, Stan Lee pushed the envelope with Amazing Spider-Man, Moore pushing the ball with Swamp Thing, just talk about these things. They actually started to think, well, you know what? Comic books can tell a different story. It doesn't have to be capes and cowls. The good guy doesn't always have to win. We talked about Phrygian in the last pod.
Right, bad things do happen. It's part of a reality.
You could argue that Abby is probably one of the most fridged characters in comic book history. There's always somebody out trying to get her and use her for whatever reason. It's never for her, So it's and yet it's acceptable. I read this book. As I said, I haven't read it for ages. I read it for the pod today, and I'm still a little bit shocked at the end. I'm like blown away a little bit still, and I just think the whole idea was just so out there. I
Yeah,
don't know what
it's
that says about
intense,
me,
and
to be
it's
fair.
designed. It's designed to be intense. It's designed to get your anxiety going. It's also designed to keep your mind running and saying, "Man, this is what issue
Yeah.
number is this? What did
Yeah,
I miss before, and what's coming after?"
yeah.
And I think this was an experiment. I think that they dropped the code on this particular book. The next issue has the code back on it,
Mm.
and so that you have to look and say, okay, did not having the code stamp on this particular book, did it have an effect on sales? Were sales down? Were they up?
Mm.
And where do we go from here? And then that's, I think, of course, later on, Swamp Thing is published without the code altogether, and then of course Vertigo, like you said, Vertigo happens a couple of years after this, and
Yeah. I find, I mean, I suppose it's my final point on this one. I find it, and very similar to this point I made with Spider-Man, to be fair. If you've got actions in a comic book that are non-code approved, and you publish the book, and therefore that now becomes part of the ongoing continuity, how can the follow-up elements, which will allude to what happened in the non-code book, be given a code classification? It's, this book, they're trying to turn her into a zombie birthing pod, bless her. How's that not going to be referenced in the next issue, which has got the seal on it? Mind blown. There you go. Crazy.
yeah.
Makes
Well,
you feel like you're drowning in a swamp, does it?
Yeah. I will say this: I love the art by Stephen Bissett. I thought the art was brilliant.
Yeah, agreed.
I love that horror tinge going on. It's funny because I looked at this and then I looked at House of Secrets and I was like kind of thinking I could see how Bissett has sort of engaged some of those kind of like haunted house type of apparel things going on. The etching's brilliant. The art, the kind of way that the faces of the characters bleed a little bit is to kind of show that they're not who they really are. I think that's really well done.
Hey, you didn't have to watch an episode of Twilight Zone. You could have come here and gotten your horror fix.
Yeah. I should put a disclaimer on the show, shouldn't I?
put the comics code seal on it.
Yeah. So there you go. Yeah, I'm not doing that to this book. So comic codes, massive thing. They impacted the business. When did it stop? Does anyone know?
Yeah. So the last book that the last gasp rather of the comics code was back in 2011. So not even that far ago, when DC decided that they were not going to publish books with the code anymore, and then the very next day, Archie Comics stopped, and then that was the end of the comics code.
And we'll cover those books in 2036. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Stand by.
Do I have to actually read an Archie book?
Well, so the funny thing is Marvel stopped the code almost 10 years earlier. So DC published 10 years longer with the code. I thought that was interesting.
I'm not surprised by that, to be honest.
Yeah, I just don't think anybody was paying attention or anybody cared. So that was what surprised me, was I stopped paying attention to the code probably around the time Marvel got rid of it.
I wish the code was in place for the Clone Saga.
Mm.
It was, because it didn't go away until like 2001.
Oh, damn it. And they still let that go. Never mind.
Yeah.
All right, so go on. Sorry.
No, so I don't even know what issue it was, but it was an issue of X-Force that came back as rejected by the code. So Marvel just dipped the middle fingers at them and said, no, we're just not going to do the code anymore.
Was that the one where Shatterstar stabbed someone through the heart?
I have no idea. I didn't. I have no clue.
Okay, cool. All right, there you go. Comic Code, a piece of comic books history. Love it or hate it. It's been around. It's gone. Its impact can still be felt nowadays, I assume. or it should be felt in some books. Professor, thank you so much for hanging out. What a great topic for you to suggest. Well done.
No,
I
I
like that one. That
appreciate
was
it. I
really
wanted
good.
to talk to you guys about it.
Really well done. Great selections as well. 13th, thank you for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Great conversation.
And you're welcome. Don't forget to check out the UCPN for all your favorite shows, including Professor.
No Prize Podcast, all about the Disney Plus MCU, and we managed to talk some Marvel comics in there.
Well, if Disney Plus prices still keep going up, I don't know how much more Disney I'll be watching. Just saying.
Well, they might have put the brakes on a bunch of Marvel stuff anyway. So hey.
Right. And of course, don't forget to check out TDC, the Definitive Crusade, which drops on alternate weeks for all your up-to-date DC books, movies, and stuff. Not a lot of movies, only I got the pictures, it seems. All right, there you go. We're all done and done. Gentlemen, thank you once again.
Of
Thank you,
course.
sir.
I've been your host, Johnny Machine Hughes, and as always, adios.